You know what's funny about people who think they're powerful? They never see the ground start crumbling until it swallows them whole. We only want important people at our wedding, Sean. Not whatever you call your friends. 11 words. That's all it took. 11 smug little words from my daughter's fiancé. Austin Palmer, an investment banker. Yale graduate, heir to old Westchester money. Standing in my living room with a glass of bourbon in his hand like he owned the place. He said it with that polished smirk. The kind of face that had probably never been sunburned on a job site. Never come home with calloused hands or dirt under his fingernails. To him, I wasn't family. I wasn't the father of the bride. I was an obstacle, a working-class embarrassment. And in his mind, I should have been grateful that my daughter even got invited into his world. He looked at me like a man who believed his family's last name was worth more than 3 decades of my sweat, more than the scars on my knuckles, more than the back. I broke building homes for families who would never even know my name. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tell him that the unimportant immigrant standing in front of him had built more than houses. I didn't tell him about the network of people who owed me favors, or about the kind of quiet respect you can't buy with a family fortune. I just smiled. That calm, steady smile my crews all know. The smile that means someone is about to learn a very expensive lesson. Because what Austin didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that I had the power to make his perfect $100,000 wedding vanish in less than 24 hours. And by the next night, 150 guests would learn exactly who the important people really were. But before I show you how I erased his big day with a few phone calls, you need to understand how we got here. How I went from a kid with nothing but a suitcase and a promise to the man who built the very connections Austin dismissed as worthless, and how his arrogance lit the match that burned everything he thought he controlled. I didn't start my life here with much more than a suitcase and a promise. When I came to this country at 19, I didn't speak the language well, didn't know the rules, didn't have anyone waiting at the airport with a sign and a hug. What I had was a pair of calloused hands, a stubborn will, and the voice of my father in my head saying, "Work hard enough, Sean, and no one can take your dignity from you." The first place I rented was a single room above a deli in Queens. The wallpaper was peeling. The radiator clanked all night like it was about to explode, and the bathroom down the hall smelled like bleach and mildew no matter how many times the landlord scrubbed it. I worked construction by day and washed dishes at a diner by night. My knuckles bled mortar dust and dish soap until I didn't know where one ended and the other began. I'd come home after 16 hours and look out the cracked window at the skyline in the distance, promising myself that one day I'd build something that would last. Something my children could be proud of. Something that couldn't be taken with a sneer or a signature. By 27, I'd saved enough to start small. A roofing job here, a siding repair there. I didn't have a company yet, just a name scribbled on invoices and a beat-up Ford pickup that coughed blue smoke every morning. But I showed up early. I stayed late. And I treated every client, whether they had a mansion in the Hamptons or a bungalow in Staten Island, like they were the most important job I'd ever take. Word spread, first through neighbors, then through neighborhoods, and eventually through city blocks. Not because I was the cheapest, not because I cut corners, but because I kept my word. If I said I'd fix a roof in 2 weeks, I was there in 10 days. If I said the kitchen remodel would cost $12,000, it never cost a penny more. Trust, that was my real currency. And in time, it bought me something no Ivy League degree could buy, a reputation. That reputation paid for the first real house my family ever had. Not a rented room with cracked windows. A home, with a yard, with a driveway, with a little maple tree in the front I planted with my own hands. It was in that house that my daughter, Elena, took her first steps. It was on that cracked driveway that I taught her how to ride a bike, jogging behind her with one hand on the seat and one hand ready to catch her if she fell. Elena was the center of my world. Her laugh, her curiosity, the way she would run into my arms when I came home smelling like sawdust and sweat. I promised myself she'd never have to live the way I did, that she would know security, opportunity, choice. But children grow up. They look around at the world, and sometimes they see the shine more than the substance. When Elena left for college, I felt the shift. She came back that first Thanksgiving wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She talked about art galleries, about ski trips, about the families of her new friends who lived in penthouses and had names that echoed through New York society. I didn't mind. I wanted her to see the world, to dream bigger than I ever could. But the more she visited, the more I noticed her discomfort. The way she looked at my old Ford pickup. The way she teased me for wearing work boots, with scuffed leather to pick her up from the train station. It stung, but I ignored it, because love is patient, and a father's pride doesn't vanish just because his daughter wants more than he can give. Then, one Christmas, she brought him home. Austin Palmer, hair slicked back like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Watch on his wrist worth more than the first house I bought. Handshake firm but eyes, scanning the room like he was all ready, calculating the value of everything inside. He called me Mr. Morales like it was a courtesy, but I could feel it, the subtle pause, the tone. The unspoken, "Your kind is lucky to be here." Still, I welcomed him, because if Elena loved him, I wanted to believe there was something good there. But small comments piled up, jokes about my accent, questions about whether I actually owned my business or was just one of the guys on the tools, comparisons between my modest home and the estates his family hosted garden parties in. I swallowed it all, for Elena's sake, for peace, until that night in my living room, when he finally dropped the mask completely. "We only want important people at our wedding, Sean, not whatever you call your friends." And I realized something. Austin didn't just underestimate me. He underestimated every man and woman I'd worked beside for 30 years. The electricians who trusted me, the caterers who owed me favors, the event planners who called me family after I built their offices from the ground up. He thought money made him untouchable. But I knew better. Because in this city, reputation opens doors money can't. And with a few calls, I could shut every one of those doors in his face. Sean has just realized the full extent of his quiet power, his network. I didn't say a word that night. Not when Austin dismissed me. Not when Elena, eyes downcast, whispered, "And Dad, please don't make this a thing." I simply smiled. The kind of smile my crewmen had learned to recognize years ago. The smile that meant a blueprint had just formed in my head. The next morning, while the world was still dark and the frost clung to the grass, I brewed a pot of coffee and pulled out my phone. My contacts list wasn't filled with wall, street brokers, or country club directors. No, mine was built brick by brick, handshake by handshake, job site by job site. I dialed the first number. "Luis," I said when he picked up. "How's business?" Luis Ramirez had been the city's go-to florist for 2 decades. I built his first shop when he barely had enough cash to cover the counters. He'd paid me back in small installments over 2 years. Never missed one. "Sean," he boomed. "For you? Always good. What do you need?" "I need you to cancel one order." I gave him the date. "The wedding." Silence, then a chuckle. "Consider it done. Flowers will wither in the truck. One domino." I sipped my coffee and dialed the next number. "Marta, it's Sean. How's the catering business?" Marta and her husband had built their reputation serving the best Dominican food in the tri-state area. I'd remodeled their kitchen, expanded their dining hall. When the bank turned them down for a loan, I co-signed myself. She didn't even let me finish. "If it's for you, Sean, it's already handled." 2 dominoes. By noon, I'd made 10 calls. The band, the rental company, the decorator, the venue manager whose father had once been my foreman. Every single one of them owed me not money, but loyalty. A kind earned the hard way, by showing up when no one else would. And every single one of them said the same thing in different words. "If Austin Palmer doesn't respect you, he doesn't deserve us either." By 3 p.m., the $100,000 wedding Austin thought he owned was a ghost. But here's the best part. Not one of them told him immediately. They waited, quietly, because they knew timing was everything. The stage was set, the venue confirmed as ready, the caterer good to go, the florist on schedule. On paper, nothing had changed. In reality, the walls were hollow. The foundation was dust. Austin was about to learn what it feels like when the ground gives way beneath your feet, and 150 guests are watching. As I closed my phone, I leaned back in my chair, listening to the ticking of the clock. It was no longer a question of if his wedding would collapse, only when and how loudly. Saturday morning, the Palmer estate was buzzing like a hive. Cars lined the drive. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns streamed toward the massive white tent pitched on the lawn. Cameras flashed, drones hummed overhead, and waiters scurried with trays of champagne. Austin looked like a man on top of the world. His $8,000 tuxedo fit him like armor, and every time he spotted a guest, he flashed that practiced smile. the one he probably rehearsed in the mirror at Yale. Beside him, Elena looked radiant, though her smile wavered every now and then. My daughter wasn't blind. She'd seen the cracks in Austin. But love has a way of covering cracks with gold leaf until they become too wide to ignore. I arrived in my usual way, navy suit, tie slightly crooked, driving my old Ford truck that rattled every time I hit 30 miles an hour. Guests glanced at me, then away, as if embarrassed I was there. That was fine. I wasn't there for them. Austin, however, spotted me instantly. His jaw tightened. He strode over, one hand adjusting his cufflinks. "Sean," he said smoothly, voice low. "I trust you didn't bring your crew." I tilted my head. "You mean my friends?" He smirked. "Important people, Sean. We only want important people here." "Nothing personal." He walked off before I could answer, patting one of his groomsmen on the back like a king surveying his court. What Austin didn't know, what no one knew, was that the important people were already gone. The clock struck 2. Guests filed into the tent. A hush fell as the music was supposed to begin. But it didn't. The string quartet's chairs sat empty. No musicians, no instruments, just silence. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Austin frowned, snapping his fingers at a planner, who rushed off in a panic. 2 o'clock turned to 2:15. The florist's arrangements were nowhere to be seen. The tent, instead of blooming with roses and orchids, was bare. Centerpieces missing, tables naked. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones lifted, photos snapped. "Where's the food?" someone whispered, because the catering trucks never arrived, and the band for the reception vanished. Austin's perfect $100,000 wedding was unraveling like a cheap suit, and everyone was watching. By 2:30, Austin was sweating through his tux. He barked orders at anyone in range, his face growing redder with every passing minute. His mother hissed at the planners. His father muttered about refunds. Elena clutched her bouquet tighter, her eyes flicking nervously between me and her fiancé. I just stood there, quiet, calm, because this wasn't my chaos. This was his, and the lesson was only beginning. By 3 o'clock, the once buzzing estate had turned into a pressure cooker. The heat inside the tent was unbearable without the planned fans or AC units. Guests dabbed sweat from their foreheads. With linen napkins? That looked ridiculous on bare tables. Champagne glasses stood empty. Someone muttered, "I thought this was supposed to be the wedding of the year." That whisper turned into laughter. Austin stormed toward the wedding planner, veins bulging in his neck. "Where's the florist? Where's the food? Why isn't the band here?" The poor woman stammered, flipping frantically through her clipboard. They canceled, sir. All of them. Every vendor." Austin blinked. "All?" "Yes," she whispered. "Every single one." Gasps echoed. Heads turned. Phones were already recording. This wasn't just a disaster. It was going viral in real time. Austin's father hissed in his ear. "Do something. These people are powerful. This family's reputation." But Austin couldn't hear him. His ears were ringing. He marched straight toward me, eyes blazing. "You!" he spat. "This is your fault, isn't it? You couldn't stand being treated like you are. Nothing. So you ruined this?" I stayed seated, legs crossed, watching him unravel. My calmness only made him angrier. "You're nobody, Sean," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger. "Nobody. My family builds legacies. You build walls and lay bricks. You'll never understand what it means to be important." The tent went silent. Every eye locked on us. My daughter looked between us, torn, her face pale. Finally, I stood up, slowly, calmly. "Austin," I said evenly, "you've spent your whole life confusing importance with appearances. You thought this day, this wedding, these people," I gestured at the restless guests, "made you important." He sneered. "And what makes you important, Sean?" I leaned in just slightly, my voice low enough that only he in the front row could hear. "The same people you dismissed as nobodies," I said. "They built this entire day. And when I asked them not to show up, they didn't." His face drained of color. Behind us, another murmur spread as one of the groomsmen whispered loudly, "Wait! Does that mean he knows all the vendors?" The truth was rippling through the crowd like wildfire. Austin stumbled back a step, the weight of it crashing down. The caterers, the musicians, the florist, the decorators. They weren't just businesses. They were my people. Men and women I'd worked beside for 30 years. Immigrants, carpenters, electricians, artists. The same friends he dismissed as unimportant. And now, in front of 150 guests, he was standing exposed. A groom with no wedding, no respect, and no control. I didn't need to say another word, because everyone else in that tent already knew the truth. The silence inside the wedding tent stretched, so long it began to suffocate the air itself. 150 pairs of eyes, once focused on the glowing couple they had come to celebrate, now bore down on the man unraveling in real time. Austin Palmer, heir to wealth, Yale graduate, golden boy of old Westchester money, stood pale and trembling. His expensive tuxedo, jacket hanging off him like a costume, he no longer deserved to wear. The guests, politicians, corporate board members, society wives dripping in diamonds, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the grand affair they'd been promised. This wasn't the $100,000 wedding that would cement alliances and whisper wealth across glossy magazines. This was chaos, and chaos had no place in their meticulously curated lives. I stood still, arms folded, letting the weight of silence sink its claws into Austin's pride. He could feel it, too, the crackle of judgment, the realization spreading through the tent that he was no longer in control of his own narrative. Finally, one guest coughed, breaking the tension. Another muttered, "Unbelievable." Someone, near the back, whispered loud enough to be caught on a recording phone. $100,000 and not even champagne? Laughter followed, sharp and cruel. Austin's eyes darted wildly, searching for an ally, for anyone to step forward and salvage his collapsing image. His gaze landed on my daughter, pale and silent, her bouquet trembling in her hands. He reached for her arm. "Emma," he said hoarsely, "tell them this isn't true. Tell them this is some kind of mistake. Your father doesn't." She flinched away before he could touch her. And that right there was when the tide fully turned. The audience saw it, the bride refusing the groom's hand. Gasps rippled through the tent like a gust of wind. Phones rose higher, recording every movement, every word. I stepped forward slowly, my boots pressing into the white carpet runner that now looked more like a stage than an aisle. My voice carried steady and calm, the voice of a man who didn't need to shout because the truth had already been whispered by everyone watching. "You told me last night, Austin," I said, my eyes never leaving his. "You told me my friends weren't important enough. You told me I wasn't important enough. But look around you. These so-called unimportant people. Without them, this day doesn't exist. No food, no music, no flowers, no celebration. Just empty chairs, empty glasses, and empty promises." Austin's father barked from the front row, desperate to salvage his family's dignity. "This is absurd. You think you can ruin my son's wedding over some petty insult? Do you know who you're talking to? Do you know who we are?" I let my eyes flick toward him, calm and unflinching. "Yes," I said. "I know exactly who you are. The kind of people who measure importance by money and the bank and names on invitations. But today, you learned that true importance doesn't come from old money or big titles. It comes from loyalty, from respect, from the people you dismiss when you think no one's watching." The room murmured in agreement. Even some of Austin's friends nodded subtly, their expensive watches catching the dimming light as they shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Austin tried again, desperation bleeding into his voice. "This is slander. You don't own anything. You don't control anything. You're just some construction worker who what?" I asked softly, stepping closer until only a few feet separated us. "Who built the homes your friends live in? Who repaired the offices your father does business in? Who owns the trust of every vendor you relied on for this very day?" Austin's words caught in his throat. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew the absence of every caterer, every florist, every musician wasn't coincidence. And then, as if the universe wanted to seal the moment in stone, the first guest stood up, a man in a tailored Navy suit. Someone from Austin's father's firm, cleared his throat and said loud enough for all to hear, "This wedding is a disgrace. I won't waste another minute here." He turned on his heel and walked out. Others followed. A wave of silk dresses and polished shoes rose from their chairs, murmuring, muttering, shaking their heads. One by one, they filed toward the exits, leaving behind a trail of whispered judgments that cut sharper than any blade. Waste of time. Embarrassing. Never seen anything like it. Austin's carefully constructed empire of appearances crumbled before him, and he could do nothing but watch. Within 15 minutes, half the tent was empty. The orchestra chairs remained bare, the stage vacant, the floral arch sagging, pathetically under the weight of half-wilted roses that would never frame wedding vows. And still the cameras kept rolling. Austin clutched at his tie, pulling it loose as sweat dripped down his temple. He spun toward Emma again, desperation twisting his features into something ugly. You can't let him do this. He's ruining us, Emma. You're mine, you hear me? We're supposed to... Her voice cut him off, sharp and clear. Stop. It was the first time she'd spoken since the collapse began, and the word rang louder than any accusation. She stepped back from him, her heels pressing into the carpet runner, eyes glistening with unshed tears. I thought I loved you, she whispered, her voice trembling but gaining strength with every syllable. I thought you cared about me, but all you ever cared about was appearances, status control. You humiliated my father, the man who raised me, who worked harder than anyone you'll ever know, just because you thought you were better. Austin staggered back as if her words had struck him physically. Emma, you don't understand. No, she said firmly, cutting him off again. I understand perfectly, and so does everyone else here. The remaining guests watched in stunned silence, some with pity, others with grim satisfaction. Emma turned to me, her face softening, her eyes meeting mine with something between apology and gratitude. Dad, she whispered, I'm so sorry. I should have stood up to him sooner. I placed a hand on her shoulder gently. You don't need to apologize. Emma, you just needed to see the truth for yourself. Austin's father stood abruptly, rage boiling over. This wedding is over, he snapped, his voice dripping with venom. And you, he pointed at me, you'll regret this. You've made powerful enemies today. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I simply smiled, that same calm smile my crews had seen 100 times before. No, I said quietly. I reminded you who your enemies already were. Your arrogance, your entitlement, your inability to see the value of people you thought were beneath you. That's what destroyed this day, not me. And then with that, I turned my back on them. Because nothing else needed to be said, Emma followed, her hand slipping into mine like she was 10 years old again. When we used to walk home from school together, the weight of the ruined wedding, the collapsed empire, the shattered reputations, they didn't belong to us. They belonged to the Palmers, and they would have to live with them. As we stepped out of the suffocating tent into the open air, the setting sun painted the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. It felt like freedom, like justice. Behind us, Austin's shouts echoed faintly, drowned out by the sound of cars starting and doors slamming as guests abandoned the wreckage of his carefully crafted illusion. By midnight, the videos had already hit social media. Clips of Austin shouting, Emma rejecting him. Guests leaving in droves, all stitched together with captions like, 100K wedding disaster. When the groom insults the wrong man, this is what real power looks like. By morning, it had millions of views. And by the end of the week, Austin Palmer's name was mud. Deals slipped through his fingers, clients walked away, investors grew cold. His father tried to spin the story, but the internet never forgets. As for me, I went back to work. Same boots, same old truck, same friends, because importance was never about appearances. It was about the people who stood by you when the world turned its back. And I had everything I needed. By the time the dust settled, Austin Palmer was a ghost in his own city. The man who once strutted through boardrooms and country clubs now walked with his head down, muttering excuses no one cared to hear. The internet had done its job well. Memes, compilations, breakdown videos of the 100K wedding meltdown, plastered across every platform. Business magazines picked it up. Gossip sites tore him apart. Even late-night hosts slipped in a joke or two at his expense. But the final blow didn't come from me, or even the wedding fiasco. It came from the truth finally cracking open, the way it always does when someone lives on lies. 2 weeks after the ruined wedding, I was at a job site, hammer in hand, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend. In the city clerk's office, you'll want to see this. Attached was a scanned document. Foreclosure papers. Turns out, Austin hadn't just lost face. He'd lost his penthouse. His accounts had been leveraged to the bone. His wedding financed on credit and promises that collapsed overnight. When investors pulled out, the dominoes fell faster than even I expected. That night, I sat on my porch with Emma. The summer air was warm, cicadas buzzing in the distance, her hands curled around a mug of tea. She looked smaller somehow, not because she was weak, but because she was finally shedding the weight of illusions she'd been forced to carry for too long. Dad, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know how to thank you. I almost married a man who thought the world owed him everything, and I almost lost myself in the process. I looked at her, really looked at her, the girl I'd raised, the girl I'd worked myself bloody to protect. And for the first time in years, I didn't see disappointment or distance. I saw my daughter, my Emma. "You don't need to thank me," I said softly. "You just need to remember who you are and who you come from. You're stronger than he ever knew." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for a while we sat in silence, father and daughter watching the world turn. But fate wasn't done with Austin just yet. 3 months later, word spread that he'd taken a job far from the glossy towers of Manhattan. Not as a banker, not as a deal maker, but as a junior manager at a chain hotel in upstate New York. A man who once boasted about important people now folded. Sheets and managed banquet halls for clients who barely knew his name. The irony wasn't lost on me. Because here's the thing about arrogance, it's fragile. One crack and the whole structure collapses. And once it does, no amount of money, no famous last name, no prestige can glue it back together. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was quiet, patient, inevitable. I didn't destroy Austin Palmer. I simply stepped back and let him destroy himself. And when it was all over, I still had everything that mattered. My boots, my work, my friends, my daughter. That was the difference. Between us, he thought importance was something you flaunted. I knew it was something you earned, and in the end, the world learned it too.